did the IDF make mistakes and doesn't make mistakes? 100%. Every army makes mistakes, definitely during war.
But don't you look at this and go, this is a disaster? You know, in a week we've had more than 50 people killed who are desperate and starving and trying to get food.
Israel, as the occupying power in the Gaza Strip, has a legal obligation to provide humanitarian aid to Palestinians in Gaza. For the Gaza population, this is a case of survival.
Hello and welcome to the Fourcast. I'm Krishnan Guru-Murthy and we are in Jerusalem today as I'm here all week for Channel 4 News. Now there has been another disaster in Gaza around the delivery of aid by this new Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is backed by the Americans and Israel. 27 people are reported dead, and not just by the Gaza Health Ministry. The International Committee of the Red Cross are saying that their people have been treating that kind of number of people for gunshot wounds. In fact, more than 100 people are reported injured, and this is the second such incident in a few days. The first one over the weekend was largely denied by the Israeli Defense Force and the American government, who said these reports were false. But today, the IDF have said they are looking into these reports, and the Israeli media is carrying Israeli sources saying that the Palestinians on the ground deviated from the designated route going into the aid distribution centre, and that is why this descended into some chaos. So why is this happening and where's it going? With me here, the editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post, Zvika Klein, and from the Human Rights Watch organisation, a Palestinian lawyer, Milena Ansari. Thank you very much indeed for joining us both.
Thank you.
Zvika, why is this happening again? I mean, doesn't this show that the attempt to deliver aid this way just isn't working?
First of all, good morning. I think first of all, we're in the midst of this situation, and I assume in the next few hours we'll know exactly what happened. Is that a proof to the fact that this type of aid delivery is not successful? I wouldn't necessarily agree to that. First of all, you mentioned the previous attack where Palestinians were killed near the foundation.
More than 30 on Sunday.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. So, I mean, the foundation itself actually denied the reports that it was the IDF that did these shootings, and there was different footage showing otherwise. So I think really at the end of the day, the focus should be on Hamas being a terrorist organization, not agreeing, just, returning to the mediators saying we will not agree to a ceasefire. And this is a war. Now, did the IDF make mistakes and doesn't make mistakes? 100%. Every army makes mistakes, definitely during war, definitely during a very long war, even more than that. And I think as a country, we have our own mechanisms of self-criticism, and even the public itself and the media will criticize the IDF when it thinks it's needed. So I wouldn't totally...
And you've been critical.
We've been, 100%. We've been critical of the IDF. And again, it's not fun, but I think it's important when we live in a democracy. In Gaza is not a democracy. It's a very different situation. If the IDF indeed did kill civilians, that's a problem. And it should be dealt with in a very serious way.
But don't you, as a journalist, look at this and go, this is a disaster? In a week we've had more than 50 people killed who are desperate and starving and trying to get food.
Yes, it's a difficult situation, and yes, people are starving, right? But the question, whose fault is it that they are starving? Is it Israel or is it Hamas?
Well,
is it a combination? No, but that's why I'm saying, yes, they are starving. Should I you know what I'm saying? And by the way, I agreed to this interview because it's a long form, deep discussion, okay? So my soundbite won't be, yes, there are children, whatever, without the but. But really, there is a but. And the question is, who is to blame for this? Because, throughout the more than a year and a half, there have been periods of time, many periods of time, that aid was inserted into Gaza, but it didn't reach the citizens. It didn't reach the civilians.
Milena, I mean, what we've seen is sort of the militarization of the aid process, and it's clearly not working right now.
Yeah, that's a good point. And to start off, this is definitely not a shock. when you have ex-military personnel in charge of humanitarian aid in an area that's so tiny like the Gaza Strip, providing desperately need aid to over 2 million in the civilian population in the Gaza Strip, it's a question to how come did we allow this Gaza Humanitarian Foundation take on this humanitarian aid distribution when even United Nations and several entities that their mandate and their job is to provide humanitarian aid clearly notified and rang the alarm bells from the beginning saying this will not be impartial, this will not be humanitarian aid properly being distributed, and this will not bear in mind the dignity of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip who for over 600 days have been living in brutal conditions. And these brutal conditions were exaggerated after the Israeli forces for 3 months, banned completely all the entry of humanitarian aid inside the Gaza Strip. We're talking about food, water, medicine. Even after the lift of the 3 months humanitarian aid on the Gaza Strip, Israeli forces restricted what type of food goes into the Gaza Strip and what type of medicines. So if the United Nations is saying such systems for aid distributions are faulty by nature, how did we allow it to happen?
I mean,
this is not a surprise, but let me just a really important point to keep in mind. For the Gaza population, this is a case of survival. We're not talking about war for the population that's living this brutality. We're talking about survival. Human Rights Watch documented how Israeli forces deliberately and intentionally denied Palestinians in the Gaza Strip access to water. As simple as that. We're not talking how, exactly how. 4 points. They cut off water and then electricity. And electricity up until now for more than 600 days has been cut. They cut off fuel as well. They destroyed water and sanitation facilities that were under their immediate and full control. In the Rafah reservoir, for example, Rafah was completely under control of Israeli forces. There were no confrontation, no allegations of Palestinian armed groups in that area. And Israeli soldiers detonated while wiring the whole Rafah reservoir with ballistics and bombs and posted it on social media. Again, this water reservoir in Rafah fed almost half of the population in the southern area. So not only did they destroy water and sanitation facilities like water pipelines and desalination plants, but they also attacked workers who were preparing these pipelines and water and sanitation facilities. But really, what to understand, why I wanted to focus on water, because it's as basic as that, as basic as a human dignity to have access to water. Palestinians in the Gaza Strip do not meet the adequate threshold by the World Health Organization to the amounts of water per day per person. And this has led to thousands killed due to malnutrition, dehydration, and other illnesses and diseases. You know, there's hepatitis A, waterborne diseases. We spoke to healthcare workers on the grounds, whether American or internationals, who served in Gaza and told us about witnessing day by day children dying from not the bombardment, but from the inabilities of the healthcare system that was disseminated by Israeli forces throughout these 600 days.
I mean, the trouble is that, Israel doesn't regard the UN as either impartial or an honest broker in that. And that, in a way, is a separate conversation.
I wouldn't bring them as an example.
From Israel's point of view, they're saying, look, we don't trust the people who are doing it, so we're going to try and do it ourselves. And these are, the problems that you have in setting up a new system.
Yeah, but this is also the problem we have with the international community, and it's, blind impunity given to Israeli forces. Israel says there's allegations of looting and blah, blah, blah. And then we all bow down to what Israel says and look for facts when there's no facts on the ground. As Human Rights Watch, we believe in the United Nations because the United Nations works across the world impartially, all across. There's no pinpointing to one certain condition or one certain area. They do cover the situation worldwide, and they worked in Syria during ISIS. They worked everywhere, and they have not faced this problem except for dealing with Israel. But just let me a really important 2 points that I really have to clarify. For the Gaza Strip, the situation is not like the current 600 days. Gaza has been under an open-air prison controlled by Israel, by the land and sea and air. Israel, as the occupying power in the Gaza Strip, has a legal obligation to provide humanitarian aid to Palestinians in Gaza. It's not a privilege they give to Palestinians in Gaza, and Palestinians should not be, in a way thankful and privileged to have that aid. Israel wants to occupy the Gaza Strip. They have obligations that they need to abide by, and one of them is providing humanitarian aid, and not humanitarian aid in a sense with ex-military personnel telling people to walk miles and kilometers when their bodies have been surviving brutal hostilities. It's about aid reaching people across the Gaza Strip. The advantage of the United Nations and humanitarian organizations who are mandated to do this job is they know how to do it. Yeah. We speak to them. They have
but many organizations actually stepped out of Gaza because they wouldn't agree to distribute food in Gaza because of the situation.
Exactly, because of Israeli hostilities and banning Israelis banning and denying aid coming in and accessing routes.
Human Rights
we have documented
have you checked the situation
how Israeli forces attacked areas where MSF, where UNICEF, where UNRWA has warehouses and staff. We did investigation into 6 cases, from ANERA, from the World Center Kitchen, where Israeli forces put humanitarian aids at risk, and many humanitarian aid actors we spoke to in Al Arish, in Egypt, in Gaza, in the West Bank, have clearly said Israel's deconfliction process is faulty. It does not provide them any protection, so they cannot work under Israel's brutality and in protection.
Have you at all, as a human rights organization, looked into the human rights situation of Israeli civilians who are held underground in Gaza without food, without water?
Yes,
almost like skeletons?
So usually my questions come from the presenter or the journalist, but we'll have it along.
This is a conversation.
Our main calls during these hostilities is for the immediate and unconditional release of Israeli and international hostages unlawfully held in the Gaza Strip for also more than 600 days. But this game of bargaining chips of did you document this, did you document that? Human Rights Watch, we documented war crimes and crimes against humanity perpetrated by Palestinian armed groups on October 7th. That included willful killing, murder, hostage taking, destruction of civilian property in the Gaza Strip.
600 days,
we have been documenting on all sectors the conditions for civilians in Israel and Palestine. This does not negate or is an argument to refute that 2 million people in the Gaza Strip need food and water.
Okay, Zvika, I mean, what we've seen.
But notice the word Hamas did not appear in her words.
I said Palestinian armed groups. Hamas is a political party governing the Gaza Strip.
I mean,
it's a terrorist organization.
To you.
Okay.
It's a political movement.
To most Western countries around the world.
As well as Israel could be considered also an unlawful state to many countries around the world.
But
this tick for tat does not help.
We are a sovereign
My goal
country.
as a human rights activist, as a lawyer, is to look at the people, not to defend states, not to defend armed group, but to defend the people, to seek justice and accountability for people in Israel and Palestine who have been ongoing for years.
How do you feel as a human rights activist about where the human rights argument has gone and what the effect is? Because on the one hand, you have a little bit of an increase in the rhetoric from international leaders. Not very much is actually changing in terms of hard policy. They're still supporting Israel, they're still exporting weapons, they're still doing all of those sorts of things. I mean, is it getting harder to make people care about human life?
Yeah, I'll answer this by first acknowledging that, and I've heard it now just right here, the dehumanization rhetoric against Palestinians. The language or sentences that as long as hostages are not released, people will not just be respectful.
Okay,
that if hostages are not released, Palestinians in Gaza will continue to live a case of survival. This is talk that is politics. Unfortunately, this is not human rights. When we say people are not bargaining chips, it doesn't mean you need to deal with human lives and human rights. But I'll tell you this, and it's very clear. The international community, the international institutions have been, challenged nowadays in the current hostilities. There is a litmus test that Gaza is imposing on the international community. But, some institutions, some states are still shying away with their silence, with their risk of complicity in war crimes and crimes against humanity. But, I try to focus on the institutions who have risen to this challenge. For example, the International Criminal Court issuing arrest warrants against Israeli fugitives, the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, and the former Defense Minister, Yoav Gallant, for war crimes, crimes against humanity, including using starvation as a weapon of war and evidence that could lead to extermination, So these are the institutions that I look up to.
The problem with that is that, these institutions exist really by consensus. Exactly. And if half the world or a chunk of the world just ceases to respect them or acknowledge them or says they are biased or they are, they're driving an agenda, then the actions of these, international institutions don't have the purchase and the moral authority that you want them to have. Yeah, that's the problem we're in now.
You're looking at it in a different perspective and way, which I respect that. But the way I look at it is the problem is not the credibility of the ICC. The problem is the double standards of states, because all European countries, when the ICC issued arrest warrants against Putin, we're very quick to act. We're very quick to say Putin is not allowed on our territory because as law-abiding international law states, we will follow up on the ICC, obligations. When EU specifically, for example, and the UK, let me say, actually every state has said settlements are a barrier to peace and a barrier to, the actualization of peace and security for both Palestinians and Israelis in the region. But none of them had actually banned trade with illegal Israeli settlements. None have actually imposed, clear stand against the expansion, the crazy expansion of settlements and outposts, which, by the way, outposts are illegal under Israeli law itself. So Israel is violating its own law and violating international law and expecting all the country to bow down to,
That's what I mean. Do you feel you're sort of screaming into a void as this goes on?
Sometimes yes, but nowadays I clearly say no. The statement from the UK, Canada and France is very strong. They stood up against statements from ministers like Smotrich, ministers who are saying we will displace all Gaza into a tiny area and then let third states voluntarily take them in, So states like the UK, Canada and France standing up against these statements
President
is something.
Trump also said the same thing.
Is this something we will hold on to?
So how do you think this story today of
the humanitarian
of
aid.
Palestinians being shot trying to get food, how is that received in Israel? Is it sort of blink and turn the page, or is it something that people are going, this is bad for us?
So it's interesting. This is just an experiment that I did on the way here. Listening to the 11 o'clock news broadcast, it wasn't the top of the news, right? And this is, I think, a few hours before, it started evolving the reports. I don't know exactly what time of day we're talking about. So it was interesting. So yes, it is on the margins. That said, if it is proven, even by our own people or by, I don't know, anything else, that the IDF did in fact kill civilians, there will be criticism from within Israeli society, Israeli politics, Israeli media. Because, and again, I think right immediately after October 7th, things were a bit different.
Do people not view the IDF with suspicion now, though, when they deny things? Because, there's a regular pattern. Something happens, the IDF denies it, then a few days later they have to say, yes, we've looked into it, something happened, somebody made a mistake. Yeah. We saw that with the ambulance drivers, which was denied. And then, a few days later, the IDF says, no, actually, the commander in charge made a mistake, he's being moved.
Yeah.
So, as a journalist as well, do you not look at the instant IDF response to anything and go, well, that's probably not true?
There's the citizen and there's a journalist, okay? Journalist, obviously, you want a bit more of information, and you want fact, right? Give me an aerial shot, give me proof, okay? But most Israeli citizens, and I think this is a sociological thing that most people can understand, are part of this mechanism of the IDF. Because I'm 43 years old, people who are my neighbors who are older and younger than me, including 50-year-old, have either volunteered or been drafted in the IDF, and they have many other professions. They are not warriors in their profession, but when they were 18 years old, they were in the army and still doing their reserve duty. So because of the amount of people affected, people being killed from their family, post-trauma, children that saw their parents being slaughtered in front of their eyes, and this all been broadcasted on national television, brings us to the point that Israelis trust the IDF. There are different surveys that go up and down. Immediately after October 7th, by the way, it was lower because Israel, the strong country that's very proud of itself and very big ego, too big of an ego, by the way, which probably developed part of October 7th, suddenly was not as strong as it thought it was.
And so there is no, it seems, still public demand to look at today. So reports as we speak, I think, between 10 and 20 people are reported killed from bombing, and over 20 people are reported killed by shooting near this aid distribution. We're talking about maybe 35 dead right now, and it'll be more by tonight. That is obviously many more than us, the living Israeli hostages in one day. Is that not hitting home here, and people saying, this is insane, carrying this on? Yes,
it's insane. It's terrible, and I know it's very surprising to people, but Jews and Israelis don't, the death is not a holy thing to us. And on the contrary, life is what is holy for us as a people and as a nation. I think we're sucked into this loop of just, and I think everyone, by the way, I think 80% of Israelis would agree to a full hostage deal, ceasefire, release, whatever, whether without or with the, relations, diplomatic relations with Saudi Arabia, etc., which is part or not part.
Which is true, and what we see in weekly protests in Tel Aviv, thousands of Israelis marching the streets against Netanyahu's government, calling for a ceasefire, an exchange deal that will definitely secure the release of hostages inside Gaza.
They don't totally represent, I'm saying,
there is some, some movement which is noticeable,
but
and I want
there is a movement because people just want it to be over.
Do you agree with Zvika's assessment of Israeli society and Israeli politics, or are you more hopeful?
I would say,
well, some of it is hopeful because if 80% want it, so whatever.
I would say, and this is something, living in Jerusalem, being born and raised in Jerusalem, I try so much to focus on is the people, not the governments, not the representatives, the people. And when I see Israeli teens refusing to go to the mandatory army and saying, I'd rather be in detention but go to Gaza and join this, I do see hope. I will not say no. These situations that are happening in the Israeli society are very much visible. The issue is, how is the Israeli society still allowing Netanyahu's coalition to take Israel in a place none of us wanted? And like the corruption cases against Netanyahu, while also fighting a, let's say, war. He definitely does not know what the military advantage is, or the outcome is, or the end goal is.
He's doing other things.
And this is the problem,
We agree on that.
It's since the beginning of 2023. Israel had the most right-wing and I'd say racist government in the history of Israel.
But by the way, and this government is the same government, and it's more extreme now, right? It's the same people, but it's more extreme because of the situation. And by the way, when you have a president like Trump saying, sorry for cutting into your words, but if President Trump says it's going to be the Riviera and we're going to have them go somewhere else, then these elected Israeli officials will allow themselves to say it in a more secure, less hesitant or hinted way.
Yeah, but again, yeah. See, so definitely there's so much impunity given to Israel. It's soul sucking, really. It hurts. And we're only now talking about the situation in the Gaza Strip.
Yeah.
We're not even looking at the West Bank, where settler violence has skyrocketed to a certain point. Displacement, Israeli military operations targeting refugee camps in the northern West Bank, where Nur al-Shams, Jenin refugee camp, and Tul Karam have been completely emptied out.
But terrorist groups or individuals in the West Bank.
The whole camp needs to be emptied out in order for Israel to, we've seen Israel go against Nasrallah with pager attacks, with whatnot. They are completely capable of doing attacks and taking military advantages without the civilian collateral damage.
Police was not able to. The Palestinian Authority Police was not able to do it. So
because the West Bank is under occupation. Whatever authority the Palestinian
What's the solution? I'm dying to hear you.
Dismantling apartheid.
Okay.
Dismantling the system of apartheid, removing Israeli settlements from the West Bank, evacuating Israeli settlers from the West Bank. This is not my talk. This is, by the way, the ICJ advisory opinion that said that.
Then what will happen?
There needs to be elections. There needs to be, the people need to decide who they want, what they want to do. It's not on me or you.
Your questioning suggests you don't really believe there's a solution.
I believe there are certain solutions. I've actually written a bunch of columns looking for a solution because I think the classic two-state solution, not feasible within, I don't know if you would agree to that or not, but it is in 2025, not, okay, exactly the way she's talking about it will not happen. And then secondly, a one-state solution is not something that I support. There's different types of one-state solutions. I don't support those either. So, I'm on this journey looking for solutions.
And you can't see a solution right now?
There are interesting different solutions, but there's not...
Like what?
There's different solutions. For instance, there are different Palestinian villages or whatever who would actually want to either be part of Israel or join the Abraham Accords, for instance. That's, one little... But it's a little example, right? It's not a broader example. The certain situation of the Gaza Strip is a really a nightmare, and relocation, as recommended by the American government, is and should be an option.
Relocation of Palestinians in Gaza to where?
Just like we did, yeah. I don't know where.
Okay, this is a call of ethnic cleansing and forced displacement. I just want to acknowledge that we understand that whoever calls for the relocation of people in Gaza are calling clearly for the forced displacement of. Will they have the right to return to Gaza and their homelands in Israel proper that they were fleeing from and forced out of in 1948? Because this is also a right enshrined for Palestinian refugees. So if we want to relocate,
I believe in the Hebrew
I'd like
Bible.
to entertain.
I believe in the Hebrew Bible.
Let's explore the entertainment of relocating Palestinians in Gaza. Can we send them back to Haifa to relocate there?
Are you really saying then that removing the Palestinians from Gaza is a likely
I'm
solution?
reiterating different solutions, okay, that were said by both.
I mean, that is sort of astonishing, isn't it? That we're in a position now where
wait.
you're the editor-in-chief of a massive publication.
I didn't finish. The American president, right, gave this as a suggestion, okay, and his administration has, and again, I don't know what.
Do you think it's credible?
I know there are definitely diplomatic, talks behind the scenes about some sort of a situation like this, whether it's temporary or not.
If it's helpful to know what other leaders are saying, is it only like Trump deciding what the world will look like? Because Egyptian leaders have clearly said they are against any forced displacement of Palestinians out of Gaza,
and why?
As well as
and
Jordan.
Why?
Because it's not the responsibility of third countries to take care of Palestinians
Because
when Israel, as an occupying power...
They're afraid of having terrorists within their land.
So you're saying all the people in Gaza are terrorists who are being relocated in Egypt? So the people who need medical evacuation and desperately needed medical care outside of Gaza are terrorists?
According to every single survey I have seen done both in Judea, Samaria, West Bank, and in Gaza, okay, within the Palestinian groups, as much as it can be done nowadays.
Get to the point, because I really like to know what your end statement is.
Most of them supported what happened on October 7th.
And that makes them terrorists.
That makes them want to wipe out.
And Israelis who are supporting the ongoing genocidal acts in Gaza are what?
They want to wipe out the state of Israel as
Just reflect on what she says about if you sort of collectively blame the Gaza population for what happened on October the 7th, how is the world supposed to view the population of Israel after a year and a half of killing in Gaza?
Well, I think it's a very different...
Is Israel not collectively responsible for that?
It's a very different situation.
Well, it's not that.
Yes, it is. Well, it's a very different situation. We're talking about both, as you said, militant or whatever, how you called them, Hamas, jihad, whatever, right? Islamic jihad, terrorists entering Israel, as well as many just average Gaza citizens crossing the border, taking whatever they can take, including people, including televisions, including cars.
What is the IDF?
Okay, wait.
The IDF is Israeli citizens, as you've explained.
Right, but we are a democratic country we are a democratic country, as much as can be in the Middle East. Okay, point me into the direction of a more democratic country in the Middle East.
Yeah.
Okay, I'd be happy.
Fine.
I'd be happy
I just
to hear.
want to sort of acknowledge that.
No, so I'm saying this is a terrorist organization and people who want us destroyed and will do anything they can to get us destroyed and not allow us, Israeli citizens, return to the Gaza border, return anywhere else.
But it's interesting that you talk about that while Israel has killed, 40, 50 times as many people, and you are now talking seriously about the ethnic cleansing of Gaza. I mean, that is the destruction of
I don't want to get into
Palestinian people.
I think the word
literally,
the term,
what you're accusing
the term
them of is
ethnic
literally what you're now
cleansing. The
talking
term
about.
ethnic cleansing is a very Western term. We are here.
Well,
okay, no,
call
but
it
listen,
whatever you want. The removal of the Palestinian people
we are in the
from their land.
We're in the Middle East. We're not in Europe. We're not even in Russia and Ukraine. Okay, the Middle East is a very difficult neighborhood, and therefore, you made a face when I said we're the only democratic country in the Middle East. But look around you. Like, where else do you have any other country?
I wasn't making a face at that.
No, I'm saying it can be debatable if it's whatever, if certain democratic values have been whatever, right? But I think so. Put all this together, and again, I'm reflecting to you, not my opinion, but opinion of Israelis, right?
Yeah.
When President Trump spoke about that plan, the Riviera, there was a majority of Israelis who agreed to it. Okay, so that's a fact. It's not my opinion. It's not our newspaper's opinion. That's just fact. And the world has to understand that. Now, whether it's bad, good, whatever, debatable. I know what you think of it, but what is the solution? What is the solution? There's a group of a few million, depending how you count them, people on the other side. Many of them, innocent civilians, whatever, that will grow up to be people that want to destroy the state of Israel. So what's the solution? Because UNRWA schools, we all saw what went on there. With all due respect to the UN, many of them were part of October 7th. Many of them some of them hosted hostages in their own homes. Okay, and by that, banning their own human rights.
I'm disappointed really how this has ended, because still up until now I haven't feeling that what I've been saying about the dehumanization rhetoric against Palestinians is ending. Up until now, from this conversation, it's disappointing to say, yes, Israelis will have the right to feel sad, and they've been through atrocities on October 7th, mass atrocities. But Palestinians who have been under genocidal acts for 600 days, it's their problem because they supported what happened on October 7th. Are you telling me the 9 children of a Palestinian doctor in Gaza, Dr. Najjar, all 9 of her children under the age of 12, supported what happened on October 7th, that's why we cannot feel for these children who are dying? Are we saying that pregnant and breastfeeding women who are not able to drink water in order to breastfeed their children and newborns, we should not feel empathy with them because they live in the Gaza Strip? This is complete and utter dehumanization that's unacceptable, and I will not allow myself to hear something like this. What I will end to say clearly, Israel and the whole international community is on notice under the Genocide Convention. The International Court of Justice issued three times, provisional measures ordering Israel to lift its siege on the Gaza Strip, open all crossing, send unfettered humanitarian aid in the Gaza Strip at a scale that's not 500 trucks. Before October 2023, 500 trucks used to enter daily. Now we clap because 100 trucks are entering a day. This is a drip in the ocean compared to what the needs and survival of the population
so why won't
in Gaza
Hamas
needs.
Just sign the freaking deal?
You know
just
why?
Just sign the deal.
I don't speak for Hamas,
I know you
so
don't.
I don't know why they
don't.
don't sign. But I will remind.
Why can't you look at me when you speak to me?
Because I'm.
I don't
you
know.
want me
I'm
to
a
look
human
at it?
being. I'm a human being.
You are. You're a beautiful human being,
Okay.
and I respect you.
Okay.
Thank you for existing.
And I respect you too. But
I will tell you, Israel, at the end of the day, is on notice under the Genocide Convention. And I will note UNRWA. When we talk about UNRWA, the difference is, okay, allegations of some UNRWA staff members in participation of October 7th. 2 investigations opened in UNRWA, one from the internal oversight body in the United Nations and one from the former Prime Minister of France, Canolla. Both independent, impartial, external investigations said at least nine may have participated and they were fired or killed immediately. We're talking, by the way, about 0.03% of UNRWA staff from the 30,000 that work in Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, Egypt as well, all around. So when we see Israel, attacking hospitals, and we documented Israel's occupation of 4 hospitals, where we went in saying, we want to find the command and control center Palestinian armed groups had in these hospitals. We want to see arms inside these hospitals. But we know international law says no one can attack a hospital. There's a civilian protection to the hospitals unless a party is actively using hospitals to attack. We looked into 4 hospitals. We spoke to aid workers, UN workers, humanitarians on the ground, doctors. They all said none of this existed. We investigated. We wanted to hear the Israelis. And none of these allegations were true. Even when we look at strikes killing people in shelters, school-turned shelters, when Israel publishes 12 names saying these are Hamas members, in one case, we found 4 people died in a previous attack when Israel said they targeted this school to attack these people who were already dead. You know why Human Rights Watch does what we do? And in more than 100 countries, we are not biased towards anything. Our documentation is legal standards. We apply it in all cases. And when we look into what's happening for more than 600 days, we realize that the international community is blind. The international community is bowing down to bullying by Israeli authorities. We respect the security of Israel. We understand it.
So why won't
but
Hamas
what
sign
is
the deal?
happening, the conduct
Why won't
Israel
Hamas sign
is
a deal?
doing is way beyond
Why
security
won't Hamas
measures.
sign a deal?
These
We
are
know the answer to
genocidal
that.
acts.
What's the answer?
The answer is because Israel won't commit to withdraw.
The last
And to stop-
ceasefire,
and to stop the
Israel
killing.
broke.
So that
And there
Hamas
was an
won't-
American. They reached agreements.
You know,
The Americans
answering
sent it
with
to them.
America is not an answer. America is not God or is not the Bible or the
America
Quran.
is Israel's strongest
Is-
ally.
Exactly, so
Okay.
it's not, so it's biased. It will do whatever Israel
I
wants
think we're
to
going to
do.
have to.
Exactly,
we're
I
gonna
agree
have
with
to-
you.
We're going to have to wrap it up. Just as a final point, Zvika, I mean, this conversation sort of operates in a very strange place where we can't go and check anything. We can't go to those hospitals and those schools. And do you think the Israelis should allow the media in?
It's a good
As
question.
a journalist, I mean, surely you do.
I mean, yeah. I mean, I think in general, yes. But I think, definitely at the beginning, it was very complicated and very difficult for Israel because they knew exactly what the headlines would be, right? That said, obviously, freedom of press is something that's super important within your own country. But then again, is the Gaza Strip part of Israel? And that's a debate, like a legal debate, whether it is or it isn't. But also, you want to.
Well, that's sort of irrelevant because it's the Israelis stopping the media going in.
100%.
Yeah.
Do I think Israel managed this crisis, war, whatever you want to call it, with the international media in a good way? Far from it. Far from it from day one, unfortunately. Transparency, many things. And I have that criticism, 100%. Regarding the entrance to Gaza, it's a more complicated situation. I'm kind of torn, as a journalist and as a citizen to that situation. I think at the end of the day, in a sense, maybe it would be better to let them in because instead of basing, facts on videos on social media, we would have someone who we at least expect to be credible to give those facts.
Again, more with the dehumanization rhetoric. Like Palestinian journalists who are on the ground are being targeted by Israeli forces are not trustworthy enough for the media to take on to the facts that they're doing.
Some of them accompanied the terrorists on October 7th.
I'm just,
they were the ones
showing
knowing,
and highlighting the rhetoric. This is racism.
They knew there was an attack on October 7th. They were part of
all of the journalists in Gaza knew, okay?
Yeah.
All of them.
Some of them.
But you want the international media let in anyway, don't you? Because you accept that.
It's not me as Human Rights Watch, it's the ICJ provisional measures who have ordered Israel to allow in investigations and the evidence that has been gone under the rubble. We will need years to understand what happened inside the Gaza Strip because there's no protection of evidence that happened. And this is problematic. This is what Israel intends, to really hide the atrocities that are happening in the Gaza Strip and are ongoing.
We must leave it there. Thank you both very much indeed.
Thank you.
That's the Fourcast from Jerusalem. Bye-bye.